Welcome to the Western Standards Pipeline. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. With me today, on my left, your right, is Dave Naylor, news editor of the Western Standard, Cory Morgan, podcast editor and columnist for the Western Standard. Today is November 18th, 2020. We're going to be dealing with a number of current topics today. We're going to be talking about what is looking increasingly like another big lockdown or shutdown in Alberta. The Great Reset. Justin Trudeau and other world leaders talking about using the pandemic as an excuse for a massive overhaul of social and economic policy on a national and even international level. And defund the police. Calgary and the Calgary City Council's predilection for getting on the latest BLM bandwagon. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. Before we get into it, I want to thank all of our members of the Western Standard for your generous support. We are now actually at 1 year of the Western Standard. Dave, we're just a little over 1 year. I think, Dave, you're pretty much on your 1 year holiday right now. I only predate you by a few.
Wait a minute, I should be on holiday?
Anniversary.
Okay.
You don't. There's no holidays here. Okay. 1 year anniversary at the Western Standard. Yeah. Hell of a job.
Thank you.
You know, I actually think your name is actually possibly even more associated with the Standard now than even mine. I mean, early on, I guess it was maybe seen as my hobby horse, but you know, in charge of the news division, you've done a hell of a job. You know, you brought a great reputation from your time at the Calgary Sun news desk or city desk to the Western Standard, and you've just done a incredible job with us, and very grateful, and I think our members are too.
Thanks, Derek.
Cory, you're not there yet. But we appreciate it all. Certainly one of our top read columnists. So yeah, thank you to all our members who have been with us. If you're not yet a member, please go to westernstandardonline.com right now while you're watching. Become a member for $5, $10, or $20 a month. It is voluntary. You're not required to do it to watch or read us. But if you want there to be an independent media that is not licensed by the government, that does not accept a penny of funding from the government, that serves Western Canadians, then it's important that you go out and support that. Because if you don't, in time, you'll be just back to the CBC and the same old government-subsidized newspapers. But let's get to it. We'll start with the current semi-lockdown, sort of semi-voluntary, but not really voluntary lockdown that's taking place in Alberta right now. And what's increasingly pointing towards, I think, another lockdown happening here in Alberta. Dave, why don't you tee it up?
The numbers haven't been good, Derek, the last week or so. Alberta recorded over 1,000 cases in 1 day over the weekend. The Kenney government has brought in what some people say are fairly weak regulations. They're making the bars and pubs close at 10 p.m. They've shut down kids' dance classes and group exercises, but most experts say that's probably not enough. And as you look at most of Western Europe, they're now back in severe lockdowns. Ontario, Manitoba, lockdowns. Manitoba announced, I just did a story on the website, they're hiring private security guards this weekend to start handing out tickets. There's trying to cut back on the COVID scofflaw. So a lot of people say,
and encouraging people to snitch on their neighbors if they're having a dinner party.
1-800-SNITCH, COVID snitch. So the numbers are improving a little bit over the last couple of days. We were down to 773 cases, I believe, on Tuesday. Monday, we had a terrible death toll. 20 people died in the province, and that we're now about 430 people dead in the province. So I don't think Premier Kenney wants to have a lockdown, but he may have no choice coming up.
Cory, do you think is this laying the groundwork for a lockdown, or do you think this is a genuine attempt to see if they can stop it, or have they already decided that? I think we can agree that Kenney and his government, it's not their first reflex to just shut down the economy. It's not something they want to do. I don't think they see it as the great virtue signaling the many Liberal premiers or Premier Doug Ford sees in Ontario, that it shows how great and moral you are to shut down the economy. I don't think it'd be fair to say that they fall into that camp. But to you, do you think this is a genuine attempt to see if they can stop it, or have they already decided that from what we think, we're going to have to shut it down, but the political climate's not there for another shutdown right now, and we're going to have to do this first to lay the political groundwork for it? Which one do you think? Do you think it's one of those two?
I think they're still hoping to somehow avoid a full-out lockdown. I mean, some of it is, of course, they're under so much pressure. Everybody's screaming, do something. That's the thing. You got to do something. If you aren't going to change something, people are saying, well, you're doing nothing. And the politics are getting played, and then they're trying to lay, fatalities at the feet of the government, whether fairly or unfairly. So they're doing, I think, surgical moves to say, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're targeting this. Some of it, perhaps, again, they are saying we're following the science. The number of trackable infections to, for example, restaurants and bars has been very, very minimal, very small. So why would you rush out to shut those places down if that doesn't seem to be where these infections are blossoming? A lot of it was talking about a lot of these are happening because of people in households getting together. There might have been a lot of Halloween parties contributing to this spike right now. And that's the hardest thing to control. I mean, you can legislate, but again, with the neighbor snitching and so on, but it's difficult. So that's where they're asking people at least to voluntarily, please stop putting a bunch of people in your houses right now. I don't think they want to go, but they're running out of options. And we're watching just I found it nauseating political play going on. Mayor Nenshi in Calgary basically putting a plea to Trudeau to try and get him to override our provincial government. What the hell do you think you're doing? And where are you coming from? But again, it's more, I'm afraid that it has very little to do with calming the infections as opposed to undercutting the provincial government. As well as some of the doctors who've been very outspoken calling for lockdowns, it turns out are, again, maybe genuinely concerned about things, but very tightly tied to the NDP. So we're seeing a very ugly game unfolding here. The numbers are going up and people are worried. I mean, we want to do something, but the question is whether or not a lockdown even will do anything to stop this.
I think frustrations are also growing, gentlemen. I'll give you a brief example. I've got a pub in my community that I am known to frequent, and they have a wood area where they offer people sitting at the bar service, and they've got glasses lined up along the wood. And the AHS came in and saw what they had done was they covered all the glasses with several sheets of plastic. And they had 4 visits from the AHS, and all 4 of those inspectors gave them approval for that. And then on Friday, they got another visit. And this inspector says, no, that's no good. So they had to shut down their wood service for a week until they could get a plexiglass installer in to install plexiglass. So it's, I guess there's a sense of almost confusion amongst bar owners and restaurant owners. What exactly are the rules? And I don't think they're being explained very well.
Well, we're in a bizarre spot right now. So, things are being shut down that don't make sense and we're being told this is kind of a voluntary. No, it's not voluntary. It's just not the full hyper draconian shutdown that we've seen before. My daughter's dance class is shut down. You had a story on that with other dance classes being shut down. My daughter's 3 years old. There hasn't been a single case of COVID that's come from this. When I go there, it is crazy safe. The girls dance in these little taped off squares. They stay in these squares. They enter and exit the room and numbers. I can't control my daughter to do that kind of discipline, but these dance classes have been very, very good about it. They've been complying with everything, and now it's shut down. My 3-year-old now is supposed to go to a dance class on Zoom. How am I supposed to do that? Some person in a comfortable remote job can work through Zoom, and that's great for them. But you can't get social interaction through Zoom. When the first lockdown took place, that is when the modeling was showing we were looking at Spanish flu type numbers. We're looking at massive numbers of deaths. We know that all of the we have a comment now from Robert O'Leary. Dr. Roger Hawkinson told the Edmonton City Council lockdowns are utterly ridiculous in dealing with COVID-19. Just last night, Dave broke the story about Dr. Hawkinson. I haven't seen that on any other news outlet. They have let's just say they have declined to report on it. But blasting these measures, saying face masks are utterly useless. That's a direct quote. That the lockdowns aren't working. That they're leading to suicides and business failures and depression. humans are social animals. We need to see other people. If people are going to be convinced of the need for a lockdown, we have to be convinced that the threat is consummate with destroying absolutely everything else. And when the first lockdown took place, I took, fine, I'll comply. We'll see how it goes. But it turns out the modeling, you've written some great stuff on this, Cory. The modeling was not even close. It is like a very, very, very bad flu season. Funny enough, there have been 0 influenza cases in Alberta this year. I think I'm not mistaken, but that would be the first time in the history of Alberta that there are 0 influenza cases.
There's only 17 in the entire country. 17 cases in the entire country.
How could that be possible? You know why? It's not. It's being overreported. Dr. Hawkinson's advice was that we should stop mass testing of everybody because it's pretty flimsy testing to begin with. What we should do is you get tested if you feel symptoms. You go into the hospital or you go to your doctor. You get tested then, because right now we're over-reporting. When we're comparing data across months of people being infected, well, if you test more people, you're going to get more positive results. And many of these positives we've seen are not actually positives; they're false positives. So,
just to clarify on Robert's note, there it's Dr. Hodkinson.
Yeah,
is the correct name of the gentleman.
Yeah,
that's part of the question. I mean, if you line up 10 experts, you're going to get 10 points of view. And that's, I'm certain many of them are genuine, but there's just a whole lot in the air still on this whole thing. People are scared and they want to see something, but at the same time, from all I can see, they don't really know how to stop this, but we do know. One thing we know is we can do a heck of a lot of damage trying to stop it. And that's something I think is being underreported. We're forgetting the COVID overdoses, the bankruptcies. I mean, most of the strongest voices calling for lockdowns are people who are on salary who can work from home. They are not the construction workers who are suddenly going to be out of work, the hospitality sector workers who are going to be out of work, the small business owners who are going to go bankrupt.
The number of cases that have been transmitted and identified to hospitality, bars and restaurants, it's incredibly, incredibly low. And now, you got guys like Palliser in Manitoba who's now hiring private investigators to go out and bust people and encouraging people to snitch on people for having people over for Christmas. I mean, I might be wrong, but I think at the very least, a large number of people, probably a small majority at least in Alberta, if not in other provinces, are not going to buy in the kind of social license, if you will, to another massive shutdown, particularly at Christmas. People are going to say, look, we bought into this the first time. It turned out to be unnecessary. We can point to examples now like Sweden, which have done extremely well without shutdowns, taking reasonable, moderate measures. I don't think there's going to be anything close to universal compliance. And unless you have that kind of moral authority for universal compliance, the shutdown doesn't matter. Everybody, absolutely everybody needs to do it together, or it's utterly useless. And so I think what the government's doing right now, I think as we said, I don't think it would be fair to say Kenney wants a shutdown. I do not think it's fair to say he sees this as a great moral virtue signaling that, say, Doug Ford does. But I think he is bending towards Hinshaw and whatnot, what you're telling him. You need to do this. The media is banging the drum for it. Or media outside of us are doing that. And I think what we're seeing right now is they're just trying to lay the groundwork for it, saying, hey, guys, we tried this lesser shutdown, didn't work, so we have to do this. I'm sorry, I don't want to. But I think it's a big problem because as the pandemic has become strangely ideologically divided, most of the people against these lockdowns, they're not just the conspiracy theorists, this is all mind control people. I think a majority of people take it seriously. They understand this is a bad thing. This is not fake. There is a real pandemic, but we simply can't. It's not as bad as we were told it was going to be. We can't shut down society for years on end. And guess what? There's a vaccine on the way. Pfizer and another company. There's two vaccines on the way with a 95%.
Really promising.
That is a very strong rate. 95%. That is on the way. It'll start probably with healthcare professionals and VIPs, and then it'll work its way down to plebs like us. But hope is on the horizon, and we've got to move forward. So I think without almost universal buy-in for a lockdown like there was with the very first one in March or whatever last year, it's useless. And it really just becomes a purely political virtue signaling operation, even if that's not really what the government's trying to achieve. Anything else on that one, guys?
Oh, we could fill a whole show on that. We should move on. I'm sure there'll be more to talk.
Well, speaking of politicians and the pandemic, the Great Reset. Now, the Great Reset has been a term that's been floated around by some on the hard left for some time to use the pandemic as an excuse for a massive reset of Western society and Western economy in their centrally planned, all-knowing beliefs. Now, a lot of the people who've been talking about this have been generally on the fringe. I've seen it kind of going around a lot of the more conspiracy theory related groups, and you see the guy who would have the sign saying the end is nigh before the pandemic has beware the Great Reset sign now. So it's been easy to kind of dismiss this as a fringe and kooky thing, but it no longer is. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, just the other day, used those exact words, and the need to use the so-called Great Reset to usher in a great new Trudeaupian age. Dave, why don't you cue up what it is the Prime Minister said and what is he was trying to really dig at?
He was speaking to a United Nations committee in September, Derek, and basically I think you summed it up nicely. He was basically saying the pandemic is a good excuse to completely do a great reset, to reset Canadian financial thinking, to reset Canadian social plans, environmental plans, basically scrub everything we've got now and start again and do it all over again. It sort of got into the woodwork for a little bit, but now it's starting to come out, and a lot of people are certainly talking about it across the country. That's for sure.
Well, that's it. It has been around for a while. It's unfortunate. Like, this is part of the UN and UN's Agenda 30. I don't like how the UN.
You sound like a crazy man as soon as you say that.
I hate their titles because they had Agenda 21 too, which as soon as people talk about it, it sounds like people with Area 51 and aliens. But these things are entrenched. Go to the UN website. You can read these. The main thing is that they're put together by pointy-headed academics and ideologues, and they do these papers at great expense to the developed world, and they put it out there. But most rational leaders say, yeah, okay, these are lofty goals and things, and they just dismiss it. And then they came out with a new 2031, which, again, we could dismiss. Okay, that's what these clowns want to do, but no serious leader is going to pursue that. It would be a catastrophe. Suddenly, Prime Minister Clown Shoes is actually talking about it. Now, that brought it into a whole new level. It's out of the academic corners of talking about these theoretical things. And he spoke directly of the UN agenda on that and the Great Reset, which, again, yeah, I mean, it's a horrific theory. It's talking about, and Trudeau went a little further. He didn't just use the term that people are saying is taken out of context. He was talking about reshaping our economic system. That is huge. It's monstrous. And needs to be expanded upon. He dipped his toe into, the Great Reset, and using that term for it. Well, that means you tear it down to the ground floor, you bankrupt the nation, and then rebuild a socialist system from the rubble. That in a nutshell is what the Great Reset is.
I'm fine with the Great Reset as long as we burn it all to the ground and don't do anything after that.
Well, then there's the Great Anarchy, and that's fine, and I can live with that. I live on an acreage and I'm well armed, but not everybody is going to perhaps go through that as comfortably. It was astounding to hear a world leader.
Well, that's the thing is with these you hear UN's Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. It's kooky stuff, but you're right. We normally these are aspirational goals written by a bunch of UN bureaucrats and politicians who are fine to put their name to it because it's not binding. I'm not one of these guys who believes that the UN has any power. It doesn't. How many troops does UN have? None. Only whatever anyone gives it. It's not the great powerful organization. Something it does all sorts of kooky, crazy, and stupid things, but I don't believe the Illuminati are running this thing. But I don't take it seriously because none of these world leaders generally take it seriously. But then when you have the Prime Minister of our country explicitly endorse this stuff and take it seriously and saying this is something we're going to do well, then I have to sit up and take notice of that. It's no longer in the kooky, the end is nigh guy, sign holding guy. This is now the Prime Minister holding up the sign. That should set off alarm bells. The federal Tories have been remarkably quiet about this stuff, with the notable exception of Pierre Poliver and, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a bit Michelle Rempel. There's been a few who have struck out. True Blue Aaron O'Toole has been very red since having the job. I mean, as soon as you have the support of your party members in the leadership race, you always run to the center. That's just what happens. Don't ever believe it's going to be different, folks. But I mean, with the exception of a few folks in the Tory ranks, the Tories have been very quiet about this. Maybe they don't want to sound conspiratorial, because a lot of this talk often is associated with that. But I mean, this is Trudeau trying to use, and he's not the only world leader doing it, but he's the only one I'm aware of so far who's explicitly endorsed it in this language. Joe Biden says build back better and all the crap rhetoric associated with that.
Trudeau was pretty blunt and straightforward with it. You know, one of the arguments I did see from some other people on Twitter and saying, you know, well, look, Trudeau is not some shadowy, cerebral sort of mustache tweaking backroom monster. The argument they're making basically is Trudeau's too stupid to come up with something like
That's the good
and
news.
They've got a bit of point there, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, Trudeau parrots what his handlers tell him to do. So he's not pulling this up out of nowhere. If he was going to pull it up out of nowhere, he'd bring up his pop-up books for the day. He's getting this stuff from somewhere, and he's putting it forward. So again, be concerned, be very concerned. Sure, he's the mouthpiece, he's the figurehead, but he's the one who's got the signature.
Yeah, we should be grateful that he's not smart enough to mastermind something like this, because he would probably want to. His father was smart enough. His father was much more dangerous for that reason. But in a different sense, Justin Trudeau is also dangerous because he doesn't really have a mind of his own. He is controlled by other players surrounding him to a degree that most other Canadian or provincial leaders are not.
You do get the sense that Gerald Butts is behind this somehow, don't you?
He usually is.
I'm careful not to attribute everything to Gerald Butts, because like he isn't pulling the strings on everything, but God, he's got to be pulling a lot of them. He's got to be one of
the
them.
wizards behind the curtain.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that does need to be burned down and a complete reset, and that's the United Nations.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, what do we reset the UN?
Well, what a disreputable organization. Somebody tweeted out with the list of the 2021, I put that in one of my rants the other week. I listed that, of the Human Rights Council. Not just most of them, every single one of them were countries that had horrific human rights records. These are the guys that are supposed to lecture. How can you guys take yourself seriously when you got Somalia and China and Iran?
Until France is off the Permanent Security Council, I am not putting up with the UN. France off, and time for some more important countries to come in. What's France done lately? Actually, you know what? Actually, I got to give... I have to eat that. France actually has shown more balls lately on free speech issues than almost any other country on the planet.
Macron gave the extremists the finger.
Yeah.
He told them to get the hell out.
And and Macron is not some right-wing conservative. He's a centrist, but I think he's a genuine centrist. He's not one of these like center-left who calls himself center. I think he's actually kind of a genuine centrist, for whatever relative fluid term that might mean. So you know what? I'm going to eat my words. France hasn't done a lot of good lately, but they were great on that. And then we saw the cowardice of Justin Trudeau standing with the leaders of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. These tin pot medieval dictatorships that were saying it should be illegal. Free speech should have limitations on it if it offends Muslims. Justin Trudeau standing with them rather than with France and the actual free world. So never thought I'd say it, but geez, France is better run than Canada. Okay, well, we're going to move on from there to more madness, much closer to home. As you can probably tell, we are in our Calgary offices, the Western Standard here, and not very far away from our offices, probably about not more than a kilometer to our east, is Calgary City Council, where they have already voted to, but not yet finalized their plan to partially defund the police. I don't think it'd be fair to say this is defunding the police the way the hardcore BLM activists say. although that doesn't mean anything, where they had the opportunity to defund the police in the Chaz zone in Seattle, I think it was. They just replaced it with a bunch of gangland warlords instead of the police. That worked out real well. I wish Chaz was still around. That was a great source of news. It's actually good to have a couple communist states around just so we can watch what's happening. Although, as Chaz fell apart, inevitably, they very quickly said that wasn't real communism. So the world is still awaiting our first real communist state. Dave, why don't you break down what's happening with this whole defund the police movement with city council, where it's at, and where the kind of political, how the different sides drawing the political lines.
Well, that's going to be the big issue in the campaign next year, I think, Derek. Councillor Evan Woolley has proposed taking $20 million out of the Calgary Police Service budget over 2 years, $10 million a year, and giving it to various social service agencies around the city, to help battle homelessness and drug addiction and whatnot. That has been approved by a city committee and will now go to a public meeting of Calgarians on November 23rd before going back to a final vote on city council, which seems very, very split on this issue. Councillor Farkas, who has announced he's running for mayor, yesterday started a petition that seems to be doing very well, getting thousands of Calgarians to say they don't want the police defunded. Councillor Sean Chu is also on Farkas's side. He's a former Calgary police officer, served for 21 years. So I think he knows what he's talking a little bit about. Well, that seems to be split with the Nenshis and the Woolies of the world. In fact, it's got so bad, Woolley called Chu a moron last week. So I think that's going to set the tone of the debate for the next year. And we're just under, 10 months away from the next election.
Yeah, it is something. And along with calling Chu a moron, something else that was distressing in that same sentence that Woolley spat out that day was he was also saying he wanted to target any developers who contributed to Sean Chu. He didn't expand on what targeting means and what he's going to do to these. But so these politicians are actually going after the funders of their competing members on council over a vote. It's just absurd.
That sounds very much like the NDP going after businesses that contributed to the Tories.
Very much so. That strategy seems to be going around.
Although in the Calgary City Council case, you get the implication at least that it's not just to boycott businesses, but that to use the power of city council to hurt the developers, to use the power of the state rather than voluntary boycotts.
Undertones of that, which is kind of concerning, and I wish Mr. Woolley would expand on that, but I very much doubt he will. But I mean, that's how emotional this thing has gotten. And then I'm looking at others. I mean, they're trying to polish this turd, and that's what it is. I mean, the public are realizing, wait a minute, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. If this was part of cutting spending all around on the entire city, because the police is a big part of the budget. They're saying, look, we got to get our spending in order, which they do. And we're going to cut on street maintenance and we're going to cut on fire even. We got to make it more efficient. We just can't afford it. That's part and parcel of the whole thing. I could be more understanding of that. We need to streamline. We need to get costs under control. We're in a terrible crisis. But they're not. They're doing this purely to appease Black Lives Matter, which if you read Black Lives Matter's Canada's site, people they get on my case when I call them extremists. They are. They're not just calling for defunding a little bit. They want to abolish the police, and they say it outright on their site. These guys are pandering to these extremists. And then you listen to Shane Keating saying, oh, well, we didn't defund them. We reallocated. Oh, come on.
Well, that's great. Let's take all the welfare.
Reallocate it back to the taxpayers then.
Yeah. This is actually, let's let them get away with calling it reallocation. This way, conservatives and libertarians in government, we can abolish entire departments and say we're reallocating it.
Sure, we'll reallocate 20% off of the teachers too, and that'll improve their teaching, because that's the theory, is if we defund these things, they're going to get better. And then we listened to Ward Sutherland. He came out with a tweet too, expressing shock, because I guess the police were saying, well, there was a bunch of positions we were going to hire for, and now we're not going to, because that's what happens when you get defunded. You run out of money. And he was expressing shock that they're not going to hire. Well, Ward, what did you think was going to happen? You cut from this clown show in City Hall is something else. But it is starting to backfire, and they're starting to feel some of that pressure, and that's why we're seeing guys like Sutherland and Keating suddenly trying to make excuses for this foolishness. But they always seem to be reactive and really don't understand when they're stepping into the pile of manure until they're ankle deep in it. Maybe there's a chance that they'll regain some common sense and in this next meeting and back off on this.
Look, when we get rid of the rest of the government, then we could defund the police.
Hey, give me open carry laws, and I could go with a lot less police.
Yeah, well, if I'm allowed to pack when I walk down Stephen Avenue, I feel pretty good without police.
Yeah.
That's fine. But until this is the problem with the left here. They propose changing, doing away with police. I shouldn't say the whole left, but the more extreme left. Although now even the moderate left is kowtowing to it with partial police defunding. But they're not. They talk about doing away with this without putting anything in its place. If you're going to have reduced policing, you must allow greater freedom of the individual to protect themselves. That's not what they're talking about. They want still zero right to defend yourselves. All these same people oppose castle doctrine. They oppose stand your ground doctrine. They oppose gun rights. They oppose virtually any form of self-defense except the most extreme cases. And they support getting rid of the police or defunding the police in some form. So you got to put something in its place. And they're not proposing to take a single dollar of defunding the police and put it back to taxpayers. They want to put it into more fluffy social programs.
Yeah, no, it's just absurd.
There's something else that needs a great reset. Calgary City Council.
Oh, yes.
Hey, that's a good slogan, I think, for the Great Reset.
Add them to the list with the United Nations.
Jeremy, if you're listening, there's another brochure tip for you for the next
time. Well, we're going to go through some of the outstanding questions and comments that we haven't gotten to yet. Bonnie Matheson, anybody catch the article on Trudeau's plans for a national lockdown for 6 weeks? Well, if that were threatened, then we'd be caught outside of our area. Military will haul us off to internment camps. Stand up for our rights, Mr. Kenney. You better stand up for your constituents. It's morally and ethically wrong. Stop right there. There is no proposal that I'm aware of for the military to set up internment camps like it's Dachau and send you away. They are using some authoritarian and dangerous language. These isolation camps. There hasn't been any sign yet that these would be mandatory. I mean, if there is a camp for people who are infected, and it is voluntary.
A quarantine facility or something they'll call it. I'm pretty sure they'll stay away from the word camp.
The original concentration camps were set up by the British in South Africa during the Boer Wars, but they don't really use that word anymore. It means different things. No, the government is the military. The government's not going to come, like the Gestapo and take you and throw you in a camp. That is not something we have seen yet. Actually, no, in Quebec, we think we actually did. Right? I think we saw an isolated case in Quebec where the police did essentially forcefully take someone away.
I think they arrested a woman who had been ordered to stay home and was refusing.
Yeah, no, there's.
I think she was actively infected, though, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She was not a random person.
No.
And there's cause to be concerned as things perhaps spiral deeper into higher infections and more deaths that some of these controls might really get out of control. So we do have to be worried. As I said, the internment camps and military coming around, I think, is well off of the horizon and distant. But we do have to be vigilant because we have some very eager authoritarians.
We have seen massive encroachments of authoritarianism, even early signs of a totalitarianism right across the board, not just in Canada. This has seen a massive expansion of government powers. Once government powers are taken, they're rarely given back in full measure. And also, you should remember, Justin Trudeau has no constitutional authority for a national lockdown. Healthcare is an exclusively provincial area of jurisdiction. The Supreme Courts have incorrectly ruled in the past that the federal government's allowed to fund healthcare, but it's not allowed to dictate on-the-ground healthcare policy. Justin Trudeau has no grounds to do it. Justin Trudeau can announce that he's calling for one and try to bully the premiers to do it. He has every right to use his bully pulpit to do that, and you could see that. I'd be surprised. Behind the scenes, I believe he already is doing that, but he has no power to actually enact it himself. But I'd certainly be on guard against him. I think if he had the power to do it, I think he would have a long time ago. I think we would have been in a very prolonged lockdown already. So thank God that this is in the power of the provinces. As draconian as the provinces have been, I think Ottawa would have been much worse. Donna Slater says, if they lock down, then everything should close except medical services. I say no to a lockdown, but if they have to, then they should close everything and warn people.
I think there's a bit of validity to it. I mean, we've talked about that and how inconsistent some of these piecemeal things are and things coming and going. If in fact, this latest buzzword, circuit breaker, I love how they attach their words to try and make a spoonful of sugar, I guess. You would, if you want it to be effective, you got to go for real. You got to lock people right up for a couple of weeks, and I don't feel confident that necessarily would even work. But a piecemeal halfway lockdown where we're still going to the grocery store, we're still interacting and going out. I don't know how effective it might be. Which said it would be a catastrophic lockdown if you did it that way as well. But her point's valid. I mean, saying no to it, but if you're going to do it, don't piss around.
If you're going to do a lockdown, they should say, okay, buy your groceries in the next 2 days, stock up, make your own toilet paper, whatever you got to do. Everyone's going to be shut down. And you have to do it for several months. Simply doing it for just 2 weeks and stuff, it doesn't do it. But I don't think you're going to see mass compliance anymore. I think people do not, because the modeling, the government cried wolf. And I don't think the government was lying when they released this modeling. Jason Kenney is not an economic modeler. He's not a pandemic modeler. You have these, World Health Organization folks, and they're informing everything else. It goes down to government, public health authorities like Hinshaw and TAM and stuff like this, and they work from that. And I think they're working in good faith. I don't think they intentionally exaggerated, but their modeling was not even close.
No, I think it was the same people who model election projections.
No, those guys are bang on compared to what we had for this.
Yeah.
So I don't think people have the faith in government anymore. I think they cried wolf, even if it wasn't a lie. They were so wrong about it. People are not going to put up with it anymore. People are sick and tired of this. So some people will love it. They see this as a virtue signaling thing, virtue signaling kind of thing. Some people who are generally vulnerable, like the elderly or people with pre-existing conditions, they'll go with it. The Karens will go with it. They see it as a great moral virtue signaling. They'll do it. But I think a good 50 to 60% of people, at least in Alberta, kind of people that we know around here, they're going to say no. I'm just going to, fine, if I can't go to the pub, I'm having someone over to the house. We're still having Christmas. To hell with you guys. You were wrong once. You're probably wrong again. Too bad. Jason Page says the virus isn't going away. We need to keep the vulnerable safe while going about our everyday lives. Well, Jason Page, recent immigrant from Sweden, I think, he gets it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Dr. Hodkinson said in that the story that's on the website now. Just that these lockdowns and masks are a waste of time. Protect the elderly and the vulnerable, and everybody else get on with it.
Yeah. Scott Cardell, not a question, just a comment. Fire government employees.
Okay.
Agreed.
Civic.
All.
Federal, provincial.
As many as we can. Sheldon Johnson, more leftist lunacy will mean more support for Wexit. Win-win. Well, for every action, there's an equal and opposite counteraction. I think there is some overlap between the, pandemic, forgetting the conspiracy guys, but like the skeptic folks, which I think I put myself into, skeptics about, how extreme we need to be about this stuff. There's some overlap between the pandemic skeptic folks and Wexit. I think they're two very different movements, but I think there's an overlap because both tend to have be skeptical of government power.
Well, the reset, if it happened and you tore the economy down to nothing, the government in power at the time can't be necessarily in control of what is going to emerge. So the point may be valid. That might be the way that, okay, we're ready for the reset, but the West says, we're not taking your socialist thing. We're actually building a wall in Manitoba and Ontario, and you guys go to town. We're out. So careful what you wish for, Justin.
Jared Bonnet says, Trudeau operates a very dishonest government. Why would he all of a sudden change when it comes to rounding up dissidents? Because he doesn't have the constitutional power to do so without, like his father, invoking the National Emergencies Act. When his father did it, it was called the War Measures Act. It's much more civilized sounding now. Instead of the War Measures Act, it's the National Emergencies Act. Without invoking that, you can't just go rounding up dissidents willy-nilly. They just don't have the... Even if they were inclined to do so, they can't.
We don't have a military big enough who would have the will to go after people. I mean, there's fears of these things, and they've happened in modern day, but I think we're quite a ways from there yet.
Look! If Alberta refused to comply with Ottawa couldn't even invade us. What are they going to do? Send the army? What army? There's nothing.
Yeah. We've got all the fighter jets.
Yeah, all dozen or so.
Shut down Cold Lake.
I mean, and let them send their submarines. We got more in the West Edmonton Mall than Canada. Yeah. So there we go. Well, folks, I think we're going to wrap it there, but we're grateful for your time. Again, thank you very much if you're already a member of the Western Standard. If you're not a member of the Western Standard and support our work and want to support an independent Western free press, go to westernstandardonline.com right now. Become a member. If you're a business owner, consider advertising with us. Email us at sales@westernstandardonline.com. Again, that's sales@westernstandardonline.com. If you're a business, want to advertise, we've got really good cut rates on advertising. You get your message out to an audience that is larger than the monthly readership of the Calgary Sun, but at prices that'll be closer to the Strathmore Times. That's a deal if I ever heard one. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate your questions and comments, and we appreciate your support if you're a member. Thank you very much, and God bless.